Hi, my name's Gail Kenning. Today I'm talking about psychosocial engagement for wellbeing and dementia research. I'm part of the Felt Experience and Empathy Lab at the University of New South Wales, led by Scientia Professor Jill Bennett. The work we do, the Felt Experience and Empathy Lab, really focuses on other ways of knowing, of being, of connecting and understanding, using creative and arts-based approaches. So really we're engaging with lived experience and exploring ways that we can cultivate empathy of that lived experience. So the work that I'm going to talk about today is a piece that was created in relation to dementia called The Visit. This is an immersive participatory artwork which investigates the lived experience of dementia and the relational dynamics. The Visit was derived from a series of open-ended interviews with 5 different women who talked freely about their experiences of confusion, memory loss, auditory and visual hallucinations, and their life in general. From this information, from the interviews that they gave us, we really explored the content of the interviews to find out what was important to them, what they felt about how they were being treated. And from that, we fashioned a single composite character to represent the 5 people that we spoke to. And this character, the digital character, was embodied in an Australian actor, Heather Mitchell, who voiced the words and also acted out the character and the movement of the character. So this was part of a larger research project on the lived experience of dementia. The interviews preceded the whole concept of the artwork, and this format, the immersive format, responds to the priorities that were emerging in the data. Much of the interview material explored the challenges of the interpersonal and professional relationships that happened after a dementia diagnosis. The poignant moment of awakening to a lack of understanding of awareness of their conditions and how they manage their memory slips, momentary confusion and perceptual disturbances. What became prevalent in the data was the extent to which people noticed there was a stigma about dementia, that people were misunderstood, that their clinicians would understand their symptoms, the pathology of their condition, but still didn't understand what it was like to live with dementia, to experience the condition. So often we find that people with dementia are misunderstood, they're infantilized and patronized. And a diagnosis of dementia is a time of confusion. And adding to this, not only confusion in terms of the diagnosis, but how people treat people with dementia after this diagnosis. The challenge that we faced on reading the interview data, on listening back to the interviews, was how can we create a deep-seated change? How can we get people to understand the type of change that was needed? And how do we cultivate empathy? And in a sense, what we were doing here was paying close attention to all aspects of the interview, using phenomenological approaches, rather than using the top-down approach that's used so often. We were really thinking of this bottom-up approach and thinking almost, in a sense, working through in the way of psychotherapy, the person-centered therapies of Carl Rogers in the reading of these interviews. And here we were starting with how do we empathize with people, and thinking of empathy here, not as so often the idea that you can stand in someone's shoes, but this is that you can engage with somebody else's internal frame of reference, and explore their meanings important to them as if you were there, as if you were hurt, as if you were feeling their experiences. But it's always hanging on to that as if. You cannot become them. It's experiencing what they experience as if you were them. And this was a primary part of what we were doing. So we used a verbatim theatre approach with the interviews, going through, looking at them closely, attuning to what they said, and then exploring how do we take them into a space where others can get access to those findings. And that's why we decided to work with immersive media, which is often being, touted as the empathy machine somewhat flippantly, because of its ability to supposedly put you in the shoes of another. Our argument was that you can't stand in the shoes of another of that way. You can't know what it is to have dementia, but you can sit alongside somebody with dementia. And this is what we were really looking at, is using immersive virtual technologies to sit an audience member alongside the central character Viv, to listen to her and to spend time with her. And the audience is asked to spend time with her, not to control the interaction, but for her to control it. And this is an important aspect, because so often the women that we interviewed talked about how others would attempt to control any interaction and communication. So it's very important that we put the audience member in the position of being alongside the person with dementia and not in control of the person with dementia. So the central character Viv, all her words are taken near verbatim from the 4 women living with vascular dementia. There were poignant aspects that were brought together that really started talking about the concerns of the 4 women. These were voiced by an actor to, in a sense, consolidate all of those voices and different stories into one central character. And again, in this sense, to bring those stories together, to develop this composite character, we choreographed the movements using motion capture, and the environment in which the character sits is in the former home of one of the interviewees. The nature of the interview material that we talked about often dwelt on the day-to-day living, and what we wanted to create in this artwork was, I guess, a touchstone for it was the BBC TV show by Alan Bennett, Talking Heads, and where you have this sort of central character and the audience is brought to that space. But here we could take people into the kitchen alongside Viv, sit them at her table and be alongside her in that space. And the way that this was done through the technology was using an Oculus virtual reality headset. So it positions you in the virtual space. And in this space, Viv is talking directly to you. She reacts to your presence. So as when you put the headset on, she recognizes you're there and turns to speak to you. The other way is a near life-size screen interaction with ambient sound. And again, as you walk up to the screen, the character recognizes your presence and begins to talk to you. And in this way, you are, in a sense, asked to sit down alongside her and spend time with her. And this is one of the aspects of spending time with people with dementia that we recognize as part of this stigma, that people don't know what to say, they don't know how to behave. And in a sense, they're taken through this journey. What we're looking at in terms of the psychosocial engagement is that there is a sense of this engagement in the interviews between the researchers and the people with dementia. There's a sense of people wanting to tell them their stories and share their experiences. And this contributes to their sense of well-being and their sense of giving back, exploring their experiences. But then we also want this psychosocial engagement with the audience, who, putting on the headset, sitting in front of the screen, engage with Viv. But not only do they sit and engage with her and listen to her story, they also recognize the responses in themselves. And in a sense, we see that sense of recognizing when we're coming to judgment. You know, are we starting to question this story as confabulation? And what rights have we to do that? So there's this constant, in a sense, catching and averting our responses as we sit with Viv. But what we begin to recognize is her agency, is her sense of self, is her understanding of herself and of her condition. And through that, the experiences of the 5 women who are able to manage their condition and their symptoms through strategies that they employ. You know, we wanted to make the experience as authentic as possible. So we worked through facial expressions and gestures based on experiences of older people and people with dementia. The work was shown as part of the Big Anxiety, which is an arts festival engaging with mental health that took place in Sydney in 2019. And this is where we found out the responses from our audience. You know, we did an evaluation of this engagement. We used a psychosocial engagement approach, which is the visual matrix, which is a shared experience of viewing the artwork, and then an engagement through discussion, foregrounding emotional responses and asking people to suspend judgment and analysis, but to give us their emotional and felt experience. We also did a series of questionnaires and engagements measuring comprehensive state empathy scale and change in emotional distance survey. And this is where we found that there were shifts in how people felt in relation to dementia before engaging with Viv and afterwards. And we often heard people talk about they didn't understand, for example, the amount of agency that people would have. And it reaffirmed our understanding that many people, when they think about dementia, think about those late stages and not people at times when they have that agency to have control over their life and their day-to-day. So many of the outcomes that we find in psychosocial engagements, for people who work in the process with us of participatory engagement, people with dementia, there's a sense of recognition, of connection, of being motivated. And we recognize that psychosocial engagement in itself supports well-being when we're gathering data. But then when that data is converted into, for example, the artwork like the visit, then we have also that sense of connection and engagement from the audience, who recognize the stigma that they hold in relation to dementia, and then at least the desire to overcome that and to have empathy for people living with dementia. We've presented on this work several times, and we've written about this in several different ways in relation to the technology and into the psychosocial engagement and psychosocial design. So those are a few references. And at any time, we're happy for people to contact us to talk more and find out about what we do, or engage with us in collaborative experiences. So thank you very much for your time.